I never thought I'd be the guy in one of those horror stories you see on the news, but here I am. My name is Marcus, and back in 2026, I was a graduate student in Oak Haven, Ohio. I lived in this massive, drafty Victorian house near campus. It was full of character, which is just a nice way of saying it had creaky floorboards and weird shadows. For months, I had roommates, but by late October, they both left for a research trip. For the first time, Marcus was completely home alone. The first week was quiet. I spent my nights in the second floor study. One night, I walked to the kitchen for coffee, and when I came back, the study door was shut tight. I distinctly remembered leaving it wide open. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wood, feeling a chill. I told myself it was just a draft from the old windows. I opened the door, sat back down, and kept working. Marcus, I told myself, don't be paranoid. 2 nights later, I went to make a sandwich. I pulled the mayo jar out of the fridge, a jar I had just bought. It was almost empty. I stared at the bottom of that glass jar for a long time. I knew I hadn't eaten that much. I checked the trash for wrappers, but there was nothing. I felt like the air in that kitchen suddenly got heavy, like someone was standing right behind Marcus, matching my breathing. I decided to do a full sweep of the house. I took a heavy flashlight and started in the basement. I checked every corner of the furnace room and the laundry area. Nothing. I went to the first floor and double-checked the deadbolts on the front and back doors. Finally, I went upstairs. I checked the bathroom and the empty bedrooms. Then I opened the linen closet in the hallway. Deep in the back of that closet, my flashlight hit a dark line in the wood paneling. I pushed it, and the panel slid back to reveal a dead space between the walls. It was a narrow, dark cavity. I didn't go in. I ran to the garage, grabbed a hammer and some heavy nails, and I nailed that panel shut until my arms ached. I thought Marcus had finally secured the house. The next night, the nightmare truly began. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I heard it. A rhythmic metallic scratching coming from inside the wall, right behind my headboard. I sat bolt upright. My heart was pounding against my ribs. The second I moved, the scratching stopped. I sat there in the pitch black, staring at the wallpaper, praying I was imagining it. Then the floorboard in the hallway groaned. I knew that specific board. It was the one right outside my bedroom door. It only made that sound when someone stepped directly on it. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but my hands were shaking so hard I knocked it onto the floor. The sound of the phone hitting the wood felt like a bomb going off. The brass doorknob began to turn, slowly. I watched it rotate a full 90 degrees. I had started locking my door every night so it didn't open. Then I heard a faint, raspy breath from the other side of the wood. A voice, a whisper that sounded like sandpaper spoke my name. Marcus, I can see you through the frame. I scrambled off the bed and backed into the corner by the window. I grabbed a heavy glass lamp ready to swing. I didn't hear a struggle. I just heard those heavy footsteps walking away, down the stairs toward the kitchen. I finally grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice was a wreck as I told the dispatcher that someone was in my house. She told Marcus to stay put, that the police were 4 minutes away. While I waited, I heard the sound of kitchen drawers opening and closing. Clink, clink, clink. Someone was sorting through my silverware. The footsteps came back up the stairs, slower this time, heavier. They stopped right at my door. Then something slid under the door. I looked down and saw a long, serrated kitchen knife sliding across the floor, stopping right in the middle of my room. Suddenly, sirens erupted outside. The person in the hallway panicked. I heard a frantic scrambling, and then the sound of the linen closet door being ripped off its hinges. When Officer Miller and Officer Davis kicked in my front door and ran upstairs, the hallway was empty. Officer Miller stayed with me while Officer Davis searched the house. When he got to the linen closet, he saw the panel I had nailed shut. It had been splintered into pieces from the inside. He shone his light into the crawl space. Inside that wall, they found a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, and a pile of Polaroids. When Officer Miller looked at the photos, his face went white. They were all pictures of me. Marcus sleeping, Marcus eating, Marcus at my desk. They were taken through a tiny hole drilled in the wall that I had never even noticed. They found him in the attic crawl space. His name was Elias, and he'd been missing from a town nearby for months. Elias hadn't broken in that night. He'd been living inside the walls of that house for the entire 3 weeks I was alone. He only came out when I was in the shower or dead asleep. I moved out the next morning. I left the furniture. I left the memories, but I could never leave the fear. To this day, Marcus can't sit with his back to a wall, and I will never step foot in a house that has a crawl space, because I know that just because you're home alone doesn't mean you're the only one there.
I'm telling you this because I want you to look at your windows differently tonight. My name is Leo, and back when I was 17, my parents left me alone for a weekend in our house in rural Washington. The house sat on the edge of a thick forest, the kind of woods that feel like they're watching you, even in broad daylight. It was a Friday night, around 11:30 p.m. I was in the basement, which was my favorite spot because it was partially underground and stayed cool. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, volume cranked up, playing a first-person shooter game. In the game, I was safe. In the basement, I felt untouchable. There was a small rectangular window near the ceiling of the basement, just a sliver of glass that looked out onto the backyard at ground level. While my character was reloading, I glanced up at that window. The backyard floodlight was on, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A pair of mud-caked work boots was standing right outside that window, just the boots. The person was standing so close to the house that I couldn't see their face, just their legs from the knees down. Leo, I told myself, it's just a neighbor. But we didn't have neighbors for 3 miles. I ripped my headphones off. The silence of the basement was heavy. Then I heard it, a slow, rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch against the glass. It sounded like a fingernail or maybe a claw tracing circles on the pane. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I turned off my monitor so the room went pitch black, hoping the person outside couldn't see me in the dark. I crawled across the floor, staying below the window line, and hid behind the heavy oak laundry table. The scratching stopped. For a full minute, there was nothing. Then I heard the heavy thump of boots moving away from the window and onto the wooden porch stairs leading to the back door directly above my head. The door handle began to rattle. At first, it was a gentle jiggle, like someone testing if it was locked. Then it turned into a violent, animalistic shaking. The whole floorboard above me vibrated. Leo, I thought, if that deadbolt snaps, I'm dead. I fumbled for my phone and texted my dad, "Someone is trying to get in. Back door. Call 911." I was too terrified to even whisper to an operator. Then the shaking stopped. The silence returned, but it was worse than the noise. I stayed under that laundry table for what felt like hours, clutching a pair of heavy garden shears I found in a drawer. My eyes were locked on the basement stairs, waiting for a shadow to appear at the top. The police arrived 20 minutes later. When the flashing blue and red lights hit the trees, I finally ran to the front door to let them in. Officer Sarah Chen was the first through the door. She saw me shaking and told Leo to sit down while they cleared the perimeter. When they went to the back porch, they didn't find a person, but they found what he left behind. Officer Chen called me over to the basement window. She pointed at the glass. It wasn't fingernail scratches. The person had used a diamond-tipped glass cutter. There was a perfect jagged circle scored into the window. One more minute, and they would have just pushed the glass inward and crawled right over my head. But the worst part was the back door. The shaking I heard wasn't just someone pulling the handle. The intruder had been using a heavy-duty screwdriver to pry the wood away from the frame. There were deep, raw gouges in the oak, just inches away from where the bolt met the socket. The police tracked the footprints into the woods, but they lost the trail at the creek. They found a small nest in the brush about 50 yards from my window, a flattened patch of grass, a few cigarette butts, and a pair of binoculars. Leo realized that night that I hadn't been alone all weekend. Someone had been sitting in those woods, watching me through the binoculars, waiting for the exact moment I put my headphones on to make their move. Now, whenever I'm home alone, I don't wear headphones. I sit in the quiet, and I never, ever look at the reflections in the windows.
I'll never forget the sound of that voice. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta. My name is David, and I was working late on a freelance project, the kind of night where the world feels like it's made of glass, silent and fragile. The only light in the room came from the blue glow of my dual monitors, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the refrigerator. I was deep into a coding project when I heard it. A woman's voice coming from right outside my front door. It wasn't a muffled scream from down the street. It was a frantic, sobbing plea that sounded like she was leaning her forehead against my doorframe. "Help me, please, he's going to kill me. Open the door, please, for the love of God, open the door." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard it was painful. "David," I told myself, "you have to do something." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a screech that made me flinch. I moved toward the hallway, my legs feeling like lead. I reached for the deadbolt, my hand trembling so much I could hear the keys on the hook nearby jingling. I wanted to be the hero. I wanted to save her from whatever monster was chasing her. But just as my fingers touched the cold metal of the lock, David stopped. The woman said it again. "Help me, please, he's going to kill me. Open the door, please, for the love of God, open the door." Something felt wrong. It wasn't the words, it was the delivery. It was the exact same tone, the exact same ragged sob at the exact same second, the exact same pause between God and open. It sounded hollow. It had the slight tinny resonance of a speaker pushed against wood. I didn't open the door. Instead, I crept toward the small peephole, holding my breath so the person outside wouldn't hear me. I looked through it, expecting to see a woman collapsed on my porch or a struggle in the driveway. But the porch was empty. The street lamp cast a long, lonely shadow across the concrete, and my motion sensor light, the one that triggers if even a stray cat walks by, hadn't even flickered on. The voice came again, louder this time, right at the base of the door. "Help me, please, he's going to kill me." The sound wasn't coming from a person's throat. It was coming from the floor level. I pulled out my phone with slick, sweaty palms and opened my doorbell camera app. My breath hitched in my throat. Because the camera has a wide-angle lens, it could see the blind spots that the peephole couldn't reach. Tucked into the deep, pitch-black shadow of the porch pillar, he was just a few feet away from me. A man was crouching there, wearing a dark, oversized hoodie and a black surgical mask that obscured everything but his eyes. In his left hand, he held a high-end Bluetooth speaker pressed firmly at the bottom of my door, looping that horrific recording. In his right hand, he held something that made my blood run cold, a heavy, rusted crowbar held at the ready. He was perfectly still, like a predator waiting by a watering hole. He wasn't trying to break in, not yet. He was waiting for the click of the lock. He was waiting for David to be the good neighbor so he could swing that crowbar the very second the door cracked open and the deadbolt was disengaged. I backed away from the door, my skin crawling with a primal fear I had never felt before. I felt sick, knowing that he was just inches away, separated by a few inches of decorative oak wood. I stopped moving and listened. Underneath the digital sound of the crying woman, I heard a different sound, a real sound. It was the man's actual breathing, heavy, jagged, and impatient. I didn't shout. I didn't tell him I had a gun or tell him to leave. I knew if I did, he might realize the ruse was up and try to smash the windows. I went into the kitchen, grabbed the largest carving knife I had, and called 911. I whispered my address into the phone, my voice cracking as I told the dispatcher, "There is a man on my porch with a weapon, using a recording of a woman to lure me out. Please, hurry." As I waited in the dark kitchen, the recording kept playing. "Help me, help me, help me." It felt like psychological torture, the sound of a woman's suffering being used as a lure for my own. 5 minutes later, the man must have seen the reflection of the distant blue and red lights at the end of the block. On the camera feed, I saw him suddenly stand up with a fluid, terrifying speed. He looked directly into the camera lens for 1 second. His eyes were cold, empty, and completely devoid of fear. He didn't look like a desperate criminal. He looked like a hunter who had just lost his prey. He tucked the speaker into his hoodie pocket and melted into the darkness of the side yard, hopping my fence just as the first police cruiser rounded the corner. The police didn't catch him that night. They searched the neighborhood for an hour, but he vanished into the wooded creek behind the houses. They found the spot where he'd been crouching, and they found a strip of heavy-duty duct tape he'd left behind on the doorframe, likely meant to be slapped over the latch so the door wouldn't lock behind him once he forced his way inside. David learned a hard lesson that night. In the real world, the most dangerous people don't always try to kick your door down. Sometimes they play on your empathy. They play on your soul. They play on your need to help others just to get you to turn that lock yourself. Now, if I hear someone crying outside my door at 2 a.m., I don't reach for the handle. I don't even look through the peephole. I check the cameras, and I reach for the phone, because I can still feel the ghost of his breathing on the other side of that wood. He was so close.
I was 22 years old when I moved into that drafty 3-story Victorian in Oak Haven, Ohio. At first, Marcus felt like the luckiest guy on campus. The house was a labyrinth of dark oak and heavy curtains, but it was cheap. When my roommates left for their month-long research trip in October 2026, I didn't mind. I thought Marcus would enjoy the solitude. I didn't realize that in a house that old, you are never truly alone. The first week was quiet, but then the settling noises changed. On a Tuesday night, I was sitting in the kitchen, and Marcus heard a heavy thud directly above my head. It wasn't a creak, It was the sound of something solid hitting the floorboards. I walked to the stairs and looked up into the darkness. I called out, but only the hum of the fridge answered. I checked every room, and everything was in its place. I told myself that Marcus was just being paranoid. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a rushing faucet. I walked into the hallway and saw the bathroom light was off, but the water was roaring. As I shut it off, Marcus noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. In the steam on the mirror, someone had drawn a small, perfect circle at eye level. I wiped it away, my hands shaking, and Marcus locked the bedroom door that night. The next morning, I decided to investigate the dead spaces of the house. I went to the linen closet in the main hallway and pulled back the blankets. I felt a recessed latch in the wood paneling. When I pulled it, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. I shined my flashlight inside and saw a pile of candy wrappers, the exact brand of chocolate Marcus kept in the kitchen. I realized right then that someone was living in the gaps of my life. I didn't call the police yet. I needed proof. I set up a small camera in the kitchen linked to my phone. That midnight, Marcus sat on the bed watching the live feed. I saw the pantry door creak open. A man, gaunt with matted hair, stepped out. He didn't look for food. He picked up my kitchen knife and ran his thumb along the blade. Then the man looked directly into the camera lens and smiled, as if he knew Marcus was watching him from the other room. Adrenaline hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed my keys, but before Marcus could reach the bedroom door, I heard footsteps sprinting up the stairs. It was the heavy, frantic pounding of a predator. I threw my weight against the door just as he slammed into the other side. The man began to howl, a high-pitched, animalistic sound. He started speaking through the wood. The man told Marcus that he had been watching me for months from the attic, learning Marcus's schedule and Marcus's habits. He said he liked the way Marcus slept. I felt a wave of nausea. He had been inches away from my head every night, separated only by a layer of plaster. I pushed my heavy dresser in front of the door, but then I heard a scratching sound from above. I looked up and saw the attic hatch beginning to lift. He was coming through the ceiling. Marcus had no choice. I threw open the window, looked at the rose bushes 2 stories below, and I jumped. I hit the ground hard, the thorns tearing at my skin, but Marcus didn't stop. I fumbled with my keys, started the car, and looked back. The man was standing in my bedroom window, holding the knife, watching me drive away. I flew to the police station and met Officer Miller and Officer Vance. I was covered in blood and scratches, screaming about the man in my walls. Officer Miller and Officer Vance went back with me, guns drawn. In the attic, they found a makeshift nest. There was a mattress, a stack of my discarded mail, and dozens of photographs of Marcus taken while I was sleeping. But the man was gone. He had escaped through a roof hatch into the woods. The police identified him as Elias, a transient who had been squatting in Victorian homes for years. Elias was never caught. I moved out the next day, leaving half my furniture behind. Months later, the demolition crew tearing the house down found a voice recorder hidden behind Marcus's old headboard. When they played it, they heard hundreds of hours of Marcus breathing and a final whisper from Elias. "I'm still here, Marcus." I live in a modern apartment now, no attics, no crawl spaces, but every night Marcus taps on the wall behind the bed. I wait for a second, listening for a return tap, terrified that one day Elias will answer.
I was 17 years old when my parents left me alone for the weekend in our house on the edge of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. My name is Leo, and at the time I thought the isolation was a luxury. The house was a modern build, mostly glass and cedar, perched on a slope that overlooked a dense wall of Douglas firs. On that Friday night, the rain was a steady, rhythmic drum against the roof, and the wind made the trees dance in a way that felt like they were trying to reach for the windows. I spent most of my time in the basement den. It was my sanctuary, built partially into the hillside with thick concrete walls and a single long rectangular window placed high up near the ceiling. I was sitting in my gaming chair, wearing my heavy noise-canceling headphones, completely immersed in a high-stakes match. Leo was in his own world, the volume turned up so high that the real world didn't exist. The only light in the room came from the neon glow of my computer screens, casting long, vibrating shadows against the back wall. Around 11:30 p.m., my character in the game died, and the screen went black for a few seconds during the respawn. In that momentary darkness, I saw a reflection in the glass of my monitor. I looked up at the high basement window. The backyard floodlight was on, casting a harsh yellow glare across the grass. Through the glass, I saw a pair of mud-caked yellow work boots standing perfectly still on the gravel just outside. The person was standing so close to the house that the top of the window frame cut off everything above their shins. I didn't move. Leo sat frozen, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I reached up and slowly slid my headphones down to my neck. The silence of the basement was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the computer fan. Then a sound started. It was a slow, deliberate scritch, scritch, scritch against the glass. It wasn't the sound of a branch or an animal. It was rhythmic, like someone was using a steady hand to trace a pattern on the pane. I clicked off my monitors, plunging the room into total darkness. I didn't want the person outside to see my silhouette. I dropped to my knees and crawled across the cold carpet, staying well below the line of the window. I made my way to the corner of the room where the laundry table stood. From my position on the floor, I looked up at the sliver of light from the window. The yellow boots were gone. For 5 minutes, I stayed pinned to the floor. Then I heard a heavy, wet thud on the wooden porch stairs directly below me. The intruder had moved from the basement window to the back door. I heard the floorboards groan under a heavy weight. Then the door handle began to jiggle. It was a soft, testing movement at first. When the lock held, the movement became violent. The entire door frame rattled as the intruder threw their shoulder against it, trying to force the deadbolt to snap. Leo realized I had left my phone on the desk across the room. I had to move. I crawled back through the darkness, my hands brushing against the cold floor. Just as I reached the desk, the banging on the door stopped. The silence that followed was even terrifying. I grabbed my phone and saw a notification from our outdoor security app, movement detected at north entrance. I opened the live feed with trembling fingers. The camera showed a man standing on our porch. He wasn't wearing a mask, he was wearing a ghillie suit, a full-body camouflage outfit made of jagged strips of green and brown fabric that made him look like a heap of forest floor come to life. He was holding a long, flat pry bar, but he wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was looking directly into the camera lens, his eyes wide and unblinking. He leaned in close to the microphone and whispered, "Leo, I know you're downstairs." I felt the blood drain from my face. How did he know my name? I hadn't spoken. I hadn't made a sound. I fumbled with the phone and dialed 911, my voice a frantic, broken whisper as I told the dispatcher that a man in a camouflage suit was trying to break into my house. The dispatcher, a woman named Martha, told Leo to stay calm and find a place to hide. She said the nearest deputy was 10 minutes away.
While I was on the phone with Martha, I heard a new sound. It was coming from the basement window again. I looked up and saw a thin silver wire being fed through the top seal of the window frame. The man had used a glass cutter to score a perfect circle in the pane while I was focused on the back door. He had used the noise of the porch banging as a distraction. The silver wire hooked around the window latch and pulled. With a soft click, the window swung inward. I scrambled into the utility closet and pulled the door shut just as the man's heavy boots hit the basement floor. I peered through the slates of the closet door. The man in the ghillie suit stood in the middle of the room, the strips of his suit rustling like dead leaves. He didn't turn on the lights. He moved with a terrifying familiarity, walking straight to my gaming chair. He ran his gloved hand over the headrest where Leo's head had been just minutes before. He began to whistle a low, mournful tune as he walked towards the utility closet. He stopped just inches away. I could smell the scent of damp earth and pine needles clinging to his suit. He reached out and placed his palm against the closet door. "Leo," his voice vibrating through the wood, "I've been watching you from the trees for 3 days. You really should look at the woods more often." Just then, a flash of red and blue light cut through the basement window, reflecting off the walls. The man didn't panic. He didn't run. He simply turned and climbed back out of the high window with the agility of a predator. By the time Deputy Miller and Deputy Shaw kicked in the front door and raced down to the basement, the room was empty. Deputy Miller found the glass cutter left on the floor. Deputy Shaw went outside and found a nest in the tree line 50 yards from the house. It was a cleared patch of dirt where the man had been sitting, surrounded by empty cans and a notebook. When Deputy Miller opened the notebook, he found page after page of Leo's daily routine: what time he woke up, what he ate for lunch, and how long he played games with his headphones on. The man was never caught. The woods were too deep, and he knew them too well. My parents moved us to the city a month later, but the damage was done. Every time Leo hears the wind rustling in the trees or a faint scratching on a window pane, I freeze. I don't wear headphones anymore. I don't play games in the dark, because I know that out there in the silence of the forest, there is a man who knows my name and is still waiting for me to put my headphones back on.
If these stories kept you looking over your shoulder, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the shadows spread to more viewers. But I want to hear from you. Which of these incidents felt the most real? Have you ever heard a sound in your house that you couldn't explain? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your encounter might just be the inspiration for our next deep dive. Don't forget to share this video with someone who stays home alone. It might just save their life. And if you want to make sure you never miss a descent into the dark, subscribe to the Midnight Hour US and turn on all notifications. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights on, and remember, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't watching. Good night.